Hey, my name is Antonio Cobos, and I'm doing my oral presentation on China and their disaster management policy. To understand the rationale and history behind their organizational approach to disaster management and how it got the way it is, you got to understand that they dealt with a lot of reforms uh, from having things fail and having to figure it out the hard way. China has suffered various and frequent disasters. It has one of the world's highest incidents of natural disasters, and it is estimated that every year they have billions of dollars in economic loss. And in China's early days, they had the socialist regime, and the socialist regime was really reluctant to having any sort of outside help. And due to that hyper political domestic atmosphere, the there was a huge stigma attached to seeking foreign aid because it was interpreted as abandoning the nation's glorious tradition of self reliance and negating the socialist system, especially if donors of the regime's political adversaries, then that would be denounced as shameful and surrender. So China in its early days really didn't accept any outside help at all. In the wake of giant natural disasters, from big storms, it was causing a lot of famine. For example, in the 1950s, the Chinese suffered widespread famine, and the situation was barely known outside of China due to the political regime's isolation and intentional cover ups. They were reluctant to admit production declines, and they would report record harvests, actually. So they were downscaling the severity of the situation by a lot, and that really led to reforms in their policy to implement way better systems of handling these disasters. And now they have a bottom up implementation pattern where the local government at all levels are required to have a plan in place that deals with the corresponding emergencies. And it says that by 2005, the it, the plan had been completed, and 25 specialized emergency response plans and 80 departmental emergency response plans were in place. They had everything from social security threats like terrorists to a disease threat. They also had natural disasters and man made disasters such as congestion all covered in their plan. So I think they were pretty organized on that level. And it said that county level governments are responsible for responding to emergency incidents with their administrative regions, and if two or more regions are involved, the government at the next higher level is responsible in order to avoid those lower levels bumping heads and having to figure out who solves it. Now we could talk about the disaster and hazard planning that China has and the kind of disasters that they're prone to. China is most prone to storms, floods, and earthquakes. From 1990 to 2014, they had a 67% mortality rate due to earthquakes, and floods accounted for 20% mortality. The worst for the economy is the floods, and earthquakes come in second for the most damage. They also understand that they need disaster risk reduction. After the 2008 Sichuan earthquakes, the government made considerable efforts to reduce disaster risk by putting in new building codes, introducing new programs and drills in schools, and strengthening their earthquake early warning systems. Now, we could get into the participants in the country's disaster management. Like I said, China was very standoffish. They were really reluctant to any outside help due to the regime, and up until the 1980s, they really didn't have any changes going on. It wasn't until after the Tangshuan earthquakes in 1976 that they really had enough protest from the people in order to spark change. And then in the 80s is when China agreed to sign the UNDRO, which was a proposal from different ministries like the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Cooperation that the The document claimed that it was common practice for developing countries to request aid from the UNDRO, which was a form of mutual support among people from different countries. And China was a part of this along with other countries, and this was a big change for them considering that they had never really wanted outside help before. And the next year, in 81, China actually requested aid after a major flood and got about 700 million, and then requested another one after a fire broke out. And then by 87, they had more than 6 million in outside aid from more than 20 countries, which was a serious change to their prior stance. Yeah, those are the countries that helped them out. And now I guess we could get into the final part, which was the disasters that shaped their disaster management planning and policy today. And it was not until about 2003 that after the SARS epidemic broke out, that they wanted to improve the transparency and disaster management on their policy agenda, because a cover-up was happening by the authorities that resulted in a widespread outbreak of the deadly epidemic, and it could have all been avoided. It was a giant mess, and that's when regulations were passed in May 2003 for more transparency and detailed guidelines for reporting information in emergency situations. So I think China's pretty much got everything covered up. They've come a long way from before in accepting outside help and having more transparency, and I think they're on the right track. Well, thank you for watching my video. I appreciate it.